Hello, hello, hello. Hello! Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Christen Crumpler, and this is Musical Mind Games, powered by Classical Public Radio, WDAV. Woohoo! Woo 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 woo! Musical Mind Games, otherwise known as MMG, is a live stream where we geek out about music and gaming and the cool experience that happens when the two combine. And if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing to this channel, the WDAV YouTube channel, and giving the stream a like. It is so great to be back. We took a break. We took a little bit of a break, but MMG is back and ready to be better than ever during this next part of our live stream. So, glad to be here, glad to see all of you all, and of course, tell me how you're doing in the chat. I can see the chat. You can chat if you need to, if you want to, and if you don't want to, you can have the stream in the background, kind of like as a podcast as you get other things done. We're just happy to have you here, but it's nice to have the community back and the crew back and all of you all here. So thank you so much for being here. We, as you've seen in all the titles for promotion for tonight's stream, we are going to be talking about the Game Awards and the Grammy Awards that just happened this past Sunday. The Game Awards was in December, and the Grammy Awards again this past Sunday. But of course, we were off on our break, so we figured, we'd come right back and talk about those things immediately because they have some video game music categories that we thought would be nice. I thought would be nice to talk about amongst our community, and I share some of the experience that I had in terms of looking at the nominations that were a part of these award shows. So if any of you all are familiar with the Grammys and familiar with the Game Awards, or you aren't familiar with the Grammys or aren't familiar with the Game Awards, feel free to let me know in the chat. I'll be looking at it. And we also got, while she may not be here in person, she is lively in chat. Tamberly is here too as well, so she can see what you're dropping in the chat as well. Hey Tamberly, woohoo! Glad we're back. So yeah, if you've heard of the Game Awards or you haven't, and if you've heard of the Grammys, no shame if you haven't heard of the Grammys, but if you have or haven't, let us know in the chat. Those things happen, again, the Game Awards happen earlier than the Grammys, and the Grammys it just happened this past weekend. So with those two award shows, the things that I want to focus on talking about, there we go, Tamberly's waving. Hello, Tamberly. So with those two award shows, what I want to focus on tonight is the two different video game music categories that they had there. The Game Awards had Best Score in Music category. That's what they had. And then the Grammys had their Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games and Other Interactive Media category. And if I remember correctly, that category, this is this third year being around the video game music category in Grammys. So it's interesting to see how it's deciding to grow and develop and establish itself in terms of, what games are nominated and what games win. So that's one of the things I want to focus on, the nominations within those two categories, as well as the results, since both of those award shows are already done. We already know who won, but I want to talk a little bit about, my thoughts and you all's thoughts and experience with some of the games nominated on this list, as well as these awards for these game music. Are these nominations really reflective of what gamers are interested, in the gaming community, or even just for this previous year? So that's something I also wanted to dip our toes in for a little bit tonight, to see, okay, well, these games are nominated, but are they truly representative of what games everybody was vibing with in 2024. Other than that, that's gonna be the basic meat of what we're talking about tonight. And I also got a few sound clips of favorite things and favorite moments of some of these games that I was looking at in the nomination list. Prior to seeing the nomination list or looking at any gameplay, I had to get familiar with all of them in their own way. Now, I can say afterwards, I definitely have some favorites, but it was nice to see what was out there and why, and how these games got to be selected to be nominated for awards. So I've got some videos for some of my favorites or some of the things that I thought were interesting that I want to play some sound clips of the music for. So we'll also listen to bits of certain games later on as well. Other than that, I think I can kind of turn down our chill soundstripe music and continue with what we've got for tonight. So just gonna look at it. we have some nice design cards courtesy of our marketing team. Thank you. For what we're gonna be talking about tonight. So the Game Awards, we're gonna start with the Game Awards first, since that's the award show that happened first. Again, that happened in December. So let's just jump right into talking about it. So if you didn't know what games were nominated in the best score in music during the Game Awards this past December, the games that were nominated this time around were Astrobot, then we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and then we have Metaphor Refantasio, and Silent Hill 2, and Stellar Blade. So we had those 5 games that were nominated for Best Score in Music in the Game Awards category. So I'm gonna just go through the games that were nominated there and share what I gleaned from listening to the music, and I'll let you know when we're about to listen to a piece of music from a certain game. And I'm really excited for some of the music that I've got to show you all tonight. So first, let's talk about Astrobot. Astrobot, think of it's another modern take on the nostalgic experience of 3D platforming overworld type games. So think of Mario Sunshine or a lot of the Mario games where you have this particular land or world or area you go into and you defeat some things there and then you go back and go elsewhere. Or Little Big Planet, which is another native PlayStation game. I can't remember if they had another recent Little Big Planet, but when I was looking at gameplay for it Astrobot definitely gave me that familiar feeling and fond feeling that I get from those 3D overworld type games. So Astrobot was already going into good territory with me there. The game has a magnetic quirkiness to it that gets you hooked to the cartoon-like interplanetary mission it takes you on. And how I would describe it, Astrobot, it's definitely a game that visually that plays off of it being a PlayStation game. So a lot of the characters that you see will look like mini PlayStation people, or the actual spaceship that they're on actually looks like a PS5. I thought that it kind of looks like, even though it's supposed to mimic PlayStation, that some of the characters look like the iDogs. This is gonna date me, but iDogs used to be these things that come in like a Burger King kids meal as a toy, or even Eve from the Disney movie WALL-E. The characters look like that to me, and so if that gives you any type of framework for what this game looks like. Um, Hopefully that's helpful. So the music for Astrobot, when I was listening to it, the music it was definitely quirky. Like I said, the game itself, it has this magnetic quirkiness to it. To you, almost feels kind of like a cartoon show that you're watching, and so the game helps to accentuate that quirky, get ready for a journey feeling. And it's definitely established in the rest of the game, but it's more so to be of get you on good vibes, that you get you in a happy mood, the game that you're about to go on an adventure, rather than any particular story or narrative that the music is trying to expound upon. So for example, the game seems to have a lot of environmentally vibrant worlds, but each of the world's respective music isn't necessarily a reflection of its setting. So you'll have more indirect musical connections to the level. Like there's this jungle level with the monkeys and the trees and everything, your typical kind of jungle setting. And so in that level, the kind of music that you hear more acoustic drums and an upbeat, lively sound in them. And so that's kind of what I noted in terms of the musical connection with the gameplay in Astrobot. You would also hear a lot of electronic music. I felt like at times it kind of leaned into being daft punky, but I liked that. And it reminded me a lot of other electronic music that I've heard on YouTube as well. So it to me, I didn't think it was anything treading into new grounds or mind-blowingly inventive, but it definitely gave a good gameplay experience what I watched of it. It was familiar in terms of 3D platforming, and it had an approachable on-ramp to it that just, it was concerned with making sure you had a good time playing the game and a fun time playing the game, and the music definitely helped to accentuate the fun of it all. So that's what I wanted to describe for Astrobot. The next game that I wanted to talk about, and also let me know if you all have heard about any of these games before too. I heard about Astrobot kind of toward the late summer, especially when I started watching people doing Twitch streams of it. But I really got familiar with it for this stream and getting to learn a little bit more about it because it was on the nomination list. So let me know if any of you all know of Astrobot or if you've played it before. And I'd really like to know what your thoughts are if you played it and what you thought about the music and gameplay experience. A lot of the nominations that when I was seeing the game and actual gameplay of it and hearing the music of it, what was important for me was, did the connection between the game and music, how did it enhance the experience? Did it enhance the experience or did it feel cohesive? Those are kind of elements that I was looking at when I was trying to get an understanding of, okay, well, if you're selecting a video game for best score and music in these awards show, what would you consider being something that is award worthy? So that's kind of how I was looking at these games when I was coming across them and listening to their music and looking at their gameplay in depth. So the next game that I want to talk about is Metaphor ReFantazio. Now this one, I believe it is in the same developer family as the Persona games, and that's a game series that a lot of people are very fond of, and it has a reputation of a lot of good music. Metaphor ReFantazio, it seems like it goes back into this medieval world and setting, but really its main focus with theme is fantasy, but fantasy being real life in this world, where we got cars and a 9 to 5 and such like that, that being a fantasy and imaginary to those who deal with dragons and monsters and such. I thought the premise was neat. I was definitely interested in learning more about it plot wise. In terms of music and gameplay, the experience with that, I found similarities of the music and games relationship being close to the game that I've played before, Ni no Kuni, where both in its playstyle and how it's utilized, there are elements of orchestral and vocal choral music, and they're used as themes of sorts for the story's environment, meaning that if you go into this one specific place, you'll most likely hear a theme to fit that environment. But I didn't take it as being narratively expounded what was happening. I didn't see the music as being an extension of the narrative or the plot of the game, but to help give more detail of the environment or setting you were in. So that was some of the things that I would hear. It wasn't a direct means to propel the story's momentum. But what did musically shine for me are the themes when you are charting up the map and when you're in turn-based combat. When you're in turn-based combat in Metaphor ReFantazio, that music, I thought that was really fun. It really makes you, it's really energetic in a way that you hear these upbeat, catchy vocal chanting, and every time that I heard it when I was looking at the gameplay, it immediately got me invested into the combat that was going on. And to expound on the gameplay, if you're familiar of what an RPG is, which is a role-playing game, the gameplay kind of takes the role of an RPG, where you take a turn to hit the enemy, and then the enemy takes their turn to hit you and attack and such and such. And Ni no Kuni is similar in that way. So that's why I thought in gameplay and in music, there were a lot of similarities that I noted between the two games. And with the charting map theme that I mentioned earlier, I felt that theme definitely alluded to its Atlas relationship, because Atlas is the developer of the game for Metaphor ReFantazio, because Atlas, in addition to Metaphor ReFantazio, they've also, and Persona, I believe, or at least the composer that's done the music for Persona, they've also done Catherine, Atlas, the developer. And that's a game that I've watched before, and I'm familiar with the music from there. So when I listened to the charting map theme within Metaphor, I could hear the similarities. It definitely sounded related to one another. In Catherine, if you haven't heard of the game before, Catherine, I'll say for its music, it generally has a theme of having this moody, noir-like feel in most of its music. And so that definitely kind of shined through to me when I heard that charting that music. I was like, oh, this definitely sounds like music that I've heard before in another game that they've done before as well. One of the things I did want to note about Metaphor, that when I was researching and looking at more about the game, that was pretty cool, was that Metaphor's music direction, what they wanted to do is they wanted to say, hey, what if this fantasy world, if it did have its own religion, what would that religious music sound like? Because if you played the game, a lot of music would sound kind of Gregorian or maybe religious in certain aspects, but the game's composer, they weren't directly wanting to take from religions. They wanted to make the concept, if this universe had its own religion, what would that music end up sounding like. So I thought that was neat that they were trying to explore with that. So instead of it being, tied to an earthly religion, it has its own ambiguous religious musical ties. And so the game's sound composer, Shoji Meguro, said the approach was more so, what kind of music would be appropriate for the world within Metaphor. Also, the game's director, Katsuda Hashino, said the music should sound like it's playing in the protagonist's head. So I thought that was interesting, because as soon as I read that had me kind of reframe my experience. As much as we talk here with MMG about our experience with the game, to hear that the music that we're hearing in the game is framed from the protagonist's perspective changed what, the focal point of the game's experience was supposed to be. So the depicted immersion musically into the game's world is a protagonist's experience this time, not necessarily our own and not ours as the player. So there were some neat things. I did think the looping of it, I really wanted the music to expand more of what I saw of the gameplay and Metaphor, in terms of when you're in this certain location, it not just being the same loop track, because it took a while for new themes to come in out of the gameplay that I watched for Metaphor, but it definitely has an interesting plot, and it does have some neat musical inspirations and takes. So I definitely recommend taking a look at that. Next one is Silent Hill 2. So Silent Hill 2, this was one that I wasn't sure how to feel about when I was looking up the gameplay and trying to listen to the music for. First of all, I'll at least say this. The music, it comes off like this alternative rock soundtrack. And it sounds cool. I do like it. That's the soundtrack. However, when you, as much of I watched of the gameplay, that it felt like the soundtrack was mainly absent, or it took a long while in the beginning of the game for music to be present there. Most of what you would hear would be atmospheric music, such as trees or just the creaking of buildings or the footsteps of your character James walking around. But that's mainly what you would hear, and then the occasional monster. But music, there was only at the very beginning of the game, we hear some reflective guitar string music with a little bit of minimalistic electronic synth. And then there's a scene where James plays a record from a jukebox and gets reminded of a memory of his wife. But then, outside of those two moments were so far apart from one another, and those were the first two musical moments that I could kind of grasp onto when I was looking at gameplay for Silent Hill 2, the remake. This is Silent Hill 2, the remake. And the occasional musical sting, kind of like a movie where it's if something jumps out, you hear the orchestra musical sting. It has a good soundtrack. It takes a while. If you're looking at just the first couple of hours of gameplay, it takes a while for that soundtrack to actually be a part of your gameplay experience. So that was the only thing that was kind of making me wanting more. The fact that it was mainly just atmospheric sound, and I couldn't really tell when the actual soundtrack was being incorporated. Okay, so that was the Silent Hill 2 remake. That was my thoughts on that. Stellar Blade. That this is the fourth one for the Game Awards. My thoughts on Stellar Blade. This one, so I know that Stellar Blade and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, that those two, within the gaming community, there's a lot of discourse between, who had better music or who should have won at the Game Awards. And so I'll say this with Stellar Blade, I think its popularity definitely shows, and I can see why. It's basically this cool inner planet. Well, this cool it's space type themed game, where your main protagonist crash lands on this planet that you're trying to save, I believe, your species. I still have to get more with the game. The plot of the game is where I was still a little lost in. But the music is definitely, I feel like it's so close and on par with Final Fantasy, but there were some things that made it harder for me to like it over Final Fantasy. Stellar Blade, first of all, when I was listening to it and the gameplay, it felt like the mixing, oh, that's getting really technical, but it felt like it was hard to connect what was happening in the music to what was happening in the gameplay. The music was very cool and epic sounding, but it didn't reflect that on screen for me of the gameplay that I found. It had good visuals. I just felt like there was a disconnect between what I was liking or experiencing musically to some of the execution of experience in the actual gameplay. But I will say there are some pieces that remind me of some of my favorite Sonic music, which I like Sonic music a lot. They had a lot of good music for Sonic games. And so some of them were very emotional and I think of high quality like that. So that's the only, or that I would say that's the reason for me why Stellar Blade may if you're comparing it to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it's just that disconnect for me between what's happening in gameplay to what you're hearing musically. That's what impacted my being totally loving a Stellar Blade. But other than that, I do think it's definitely a game worth looking into more. And if Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was not on the list, I think that it would have gotten its flowers, or it's already gotten its flowers, but I think it would have won and had potential to win if Final Fantasy VII Rebirth wasn't on there, which leads me to saying, if this wasn't already aware of what this would be, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was the game that won the best score in music category in the Game Awards. And I will say that I can totally see why, after looking at the game for this stream, I now want to get the game. And I now want to play the game. I can only, no, there are a plethora of things I can say about this game. And this is the game that I want to play some musical examples for you. It's just immediately, every time I loaded up videos of both the gameplay and listening to the music of it, the words, "This is so epic, this is so epic," came out of my mouth. And Final Fantasy, the franchise, isn't one that it wasn't one I particularly grew up with in terms of gaming. So I wasn't really coming with a nostalgia factor, although I have been aware of the franchise itself, Final Fantasy, and that there is some notoriety to go with the name. But seeing the gameplay and the whole experience and hearing the music for this game, it got me really excited. And I'm telling you, if I had the ability to play this game, I would definitely play it because there are some cool things about it. So let me talk more in detail about the music. this music, it's comprised of an actual orchestra, which some of Stellar Blade's music was as well. But I think it being comprised of an actual orchestra really contributes so much to the game's experience. Like, for me, the use of an orchestra for games with an epic adventure ends up enhancing that epicness like tenfold, because I see the humaneness of orchestral instruments as the bridge that makes the game's journey feel more tangible. Because I'd say, obviously, in games like Final Fantasy, where it's kind of maybe fantasy, imaginary worlds, and there are some, things you have to suspend disbelief for, if you didn't have the music like it had to bridge you there, it might be hard to connect with it. But for me, hearing that orchestral music and hearing how epic of an execution it got musically, it helped me to feel like, oh, wow, okay, so if an orchestra, whether it be strings or the brass or whatever, can get this epic and it sounds like it's actually happening in the gameplay, it just makes you feel like you're a part of that epicness as well. And in hearing how majestic the music gets, it just makes you feel like you can reach that level of majesty as well. So I think the score for this game, it does a great job of immediately immersing you into the story and connecting you with the emotions of the characters that, what the characters are feeling in that moment, whether it's urgency or it's triumph. The game makes sure you're there to experience every step of the way. So this is one where so you agree with the, yes, I agreed with the GP, with the general population. I did not deviate, but I can see why. I'm telling you, I understand why some people were, going back and forth about, like, Stellar Blade, Final Fantasy, Stellar Blade, Final Fantasy, whether or not who should have won. I just happened to really enjoy what I heard and saw and the experience I got from looking at only just a sliver of Final Fantasy's gameplay. So I want to kind of get you all into what got me hyped about Final Fantasy. So I have some selections of themes that I want to show you. So one thing I want to kind of elaborate on is that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the second in a 3-game trilogy to remake the game Final Fantasy VII, which came out a long while ago. So this is essentially a remake, or part 2 of a 3-part remake for Final Fantasy VII. So there are original themes from the original Final Fantasy VII that the game has pulled from and brought into with new life in this part 2 in Rebirth. So there were some that I wanted to show you. Like for this first one, Tifa has a theme, and Tifa is one of the main protagonists in Final Fantasy VII, and so Tifa has a theme in the original Final Fantasy VII, and in the Rebirth, they have this level where they brought back parts of her themes but recontextualized it. So first, I want you to hear two spots, or two of the musical motifs, musical themes that are going to show up in the remade version or recontextualized version in the Rebirth. So here's the first one. This is from the original Final Fantasy VII, Tifa's theme. So here's the first bit. Sounds reflective, quaint. So it sounds reflective and quaint, and I wouldn't say timid, but it's peaceful. It definitely sounds peaceful. And here's another one of the themes from the original Final Fantasy VII Tifa theme. Another theme that you'll hear in the later recontextualized one. So I wanted to make sure you heard the original ones because those are two musical melodies that you hear inside this level that I'm about to show you. So the title of this video and all the links to the music that I'm playing will be in the show notes after stream, so you are able to listen to them as well and see the playlists that I've watched them from. But this one is from the trial of Tifa. So I believe there's this section in the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth where most of the group is going through a trial, and so hers has her theme, and she's in the village where she grew up, but obviously some things happen, and I don't want to spoil too much. So let me just play it for you and you can hear how it gets turned on its head. Again, remember the first one, peaceful, wistful kind of sound, and this is what it sounds like in this section of the game, the Trial of Tifa. You hear it's minor, kind of sad, more melancholic than the original one was, which I would assume for it being a trial of sorts. And this next part was what got me when I was like, oh, listen for it. They give you just the littlest bit of nugget of that theme that you hear at the beginning of Tifa's theme, the da 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 da. But when you see the video, it switches to her childhood village then being on fire, which is why you heard the very dramatic choral vocal sounds coming after that. So it's an immediate and an abrupt change. But I thought it was interesting when I was watching and listening to that video how they brought in the original Tifa theme, but because it was a trial and it was more serious, how they made her theme even more serious with that context. So that was the first bit. I bet this sounds fun on an organ. You know, I didn't think of that. Huh. Maybe somebody could arrange it for organ. That'd be neat, having an organ version of that. The next theme that they recontextualized that I want to show you, and I'm sure, again, I have no nostalgic experience with Final Fantasy VII or most of Final Fantasy games. But I'm sure they've probably reimagined more than just these two that I'm showing you. But this one is the theme for the boss, like the main boss of the game, the big bad, essentially. And I spoiled myself a little, but like not in a bad way, but I watched the final boss battle. This music comes from the final boss battle, and I wanted to at least spare you all visually from it, but the music was too cool. It is too cool to not show you what it is. And this one was mainly the one, I mean, it's the final most epic boss battle, so of course it's gonna be. It should be the most epic one, but I kept saying this is so epic every time I was watching and listening to it, and each time I was getting like goosebumps on my arms. So I want to play the original theme, which this is called this is the original theme of this boss battle from Final Fantasy VII, and it's called One Winged Angel theme, which that refers to the main boss's name is Sephiroth. It's this dude Sephiroth, and you'll hear that in the fact that I just referred to him as a dude, but you'll hear even his name being said within the music for the game. And this one, I didn't know it by title, but as soon as this original Final Fantasy theme came on, I recognized it because I've heard YouTubers play it in their gaming videos before when they're in some distress or going through like a game's type of boss battle. Even if it's not Final Fantasy, they play that to show how serious and dramatic of a boss battle and fight it is for them. So I instantly recognized it just by its beginning. So there are several timestamps and themes that I want to play for you here so that you can recognize them when I show you how they did it in the Rebirth game. So here's part of the One Winged Angel theme. Alrighty. Immediately just starts out dramatic with energy. Every time it plays, it makes me feel like I want to be like a little gremlin just going like this. Just a lot of energy tied with it already. So that was one of the themes, and here's another theme that that shows up in the Rebirth that I want to wet you all's ears with first. This is when they start to say the evil dude's name, Sephiroth. I have so much fun listening to that one because of the momentum and movement of the sound. It's the energy is moving and you can hear the drama, the seriousness in it, but it's also makes you kind of want to be just a little mischievous. Even though this is the theme for the evil dude, I don't know, for whatever reason it makes me want to act mischievous. Here's another theme within this original version of the theme. Here you go. And then there are a few little bits. See, that's the thing with the Rebirth. You'll notice why I'm playing some of these larger and shorter bits, because sometimes you just throw in, if you blink, you'll miss it, kind of short musical blips that are from this original one. But if you know it, then you'll catch it, even though it's quick. So hopefully, my singing over it and having fun with it, you'll still catch the original melody. So, and then the last theme that I want to make sure you heard from the original one before switching to the Rebirth one. Alright, here's this one. I love this part! And you will be able to hear this, I believe, directly in the Rebirth one. It's so, like, the energy is what it needs to be for a boss battle, especially when you're fighting the main guy. It reminds me of, and I may be committing a gaming faux pas, but you're just gonna have to let it slip. I have a lot of experience growing up with Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda franchise, and, you know, mainly their early 3D world games. And this... I'm gonna get to your comment in a minute, Tamberly. But it reminds me of kind of how it would feel for me whenever playing the final bosses and like battling Ganondorf or another equally as terrifying villain in the Legend of Zelda games. Musically, it reminded me of the same thing, of that urgency and of the seriousness. And if you played up to that point and you finally got there to the final boss, the main bad guy, the music is gonna reflect that, how important of like, it's finally time, this is what we've been working towards this whole time with the game's plot and journey and narrative. And so even without having that context myself of like having that journey of playing the beginning of Final Fantasy VII, original or Rebirth, from beginning to end, I can feel what that urgency and that important like nature is supposed to evoke from hearing that music. Tamberly said the intro part sounds like something from a horror film at a circus. Yes, it definitely does sound like clown music, but I think that's why it makes me feel like I instantly like it, because it makes me get like gremlin-ish or like a clown. And that's what I enjoy about it. And you all might enjoy other things about it, but I think there's something definitely attractive and kind of like fast food addictive in its musical nature. So those were the original themes from Final Fantasy VII for the One-Winged Angel, Sephiroth. I highly recommend, if you're okay with the idea of spoiling yourself, which again, I didn't think I was spoiling myself, because instead it got me more hyped to see the final battle, because I was like, oh, if I play this is what I have in store. I want to play it so I can get to that and say I've accomplished that and made it to that point. But you're gonna be hearing some music from the final boss battle with Sephiroth, and if you're okay with spoiling yourself, I highly encourage looking and listening to the gameplay for that final theme, outside of what I play for you tonight, because again, I was not kidding when this thing gave me several goosebumps each time I opened it up and I was listening to it, and it just, again, immediately immersed me into what was supposed to be going on in the gameplay and with the story and plot. So here's the first little bit that I could note that came from the original One-Winged Angel Sephiroth theme. So let me play that for you. This is what I'm talking about, the epicness of having the orchestral instruments in it. Well, I don't want to speak over them saying his name again. See, you can hear it clearly saying his name, Sephiroth, and it just immediately gets you like, psyched and like pins and needles. It's so pretty, the music. There's that theme, you hear it again, but it's a little more plaintive than the first time we heard it in the original. And then the music kicks up. And if you watch the video, or if you played the game, you'll see that Sephiroth is like in this stage, like this huge Attack on Titan looking esque like monster of such. That's the only way I can describe it. And so you're puny and he's huge, and the music I feel like just accurately reflects that, all of that drama that's going on. The music, that's one of the things I want to kind of like box out for you, that drama, is that it reminds me of the music that I've heard before in like Studio Ghibli scores, or from games like Star Fox that also uses a lot of orchestral, like traditionally orchestral instruments and instrumentation. And it gets me really excited from that intensity that's within it. You can hear just like the woodwinds and the strings going at it, and the woodwinds make it, you feel like the wind's lifting you off your feet and kind of like flitty in air. I don't know, that's how I feel. It just feels like you get the wind knocked out of you, but you still have so much adrenaline in you. I just really feel revitalized by this music. And going back to what I was saying, or expanding on what I was saying with drama, is that classical scores, finally, see, I tied it back to classical. Classical scores, when I listen to them, and I'm pretty sure for you all who are experienced with classical music as well in our audience, you know how dramatic they can get as well. And I felt that same drama that, I hear between boats from right here in this Final Fantasy VII Rebirth music, that I hear also in operas or other non-opera related orchestral music and classical scores and such. And so I love that I can make that connection, and that connection is there, because that lets me know that there's additional ways to get immersed into classical music. It's like, just imagine if you're listening to it, whether it's on our radio station 89.9 WDAV, or if you're in the concert listening to a symphony, some of these classical music scores you can hear, even if they're not for games or not for operas or anything like that, you can imagine them being the score to grand final boss battles or different scenarios in a video games, because I feel like you could rip out some of this music that's in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and just put it in its own orchestral program. And I say this, and they're actually touring right now with this game's music. Like, they're still touring and playing actual orchestra concerts with the game's music. And so that's even more evidence that like these gaming scores have the same connection and experience that you can get just from hearing regular, what you would expect classical music scores. That's one of the most fun ways that I have with listening to classical music, is just hearing it and imagining what different scenarios to it. So I challenge you to listen to some of these different classical pieces that are, were not intended with video games in mind, and thinking what kind of gaming scenarios could happen whilst the music is going on, because I'm pretty sure you could dream and imagine some interesting scenarios yourself. You can hear the driving energy an orchestra can give. That's so important. And that's, I think, another reason why I really liked and agreed with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth winning, because of that liveliness in the orchestral instruments and arrangement. It just happened to be one of my favorite ways to do video game music. It's not my sole favorite way, but it's one of my favorite ways of hearing video game music. And this Final Fantasy VII just did a fantastic job. That is not the only example I want to show you from the Sephiroth battle. I would be ashamed of myself if I did so. For lack of, or to make sure that I play it all for you in a timely manner, I'm going to play the rest of these musical themes from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and how it's recontextualized so you can hear it. So there was that first one where you could hear Sephiroth. So here is the next one that I was like, oh, now this is a direct rip or reimagining from the original one. So I want to make sure that you all hear it as well. All right. Again, I highly encourage you all to look at gameplay for it. There's that circus music Tamberly was talking about before in the chat. Hear him say his name. Sephiroth. It just sounds so epic. There's that other thing. They bring in some of the motifs in every now and then and weave them in. It just sounds so dramatic and chaotic, and I love it. And it's just, it feels just like it's filling you with energy. But if this is your final boss battle, how could it be anything else other than this, but this overwhelming, like, it's finally time. And I feel like that music, like, fabulously communicates that. It gives me a gameplay experience just from watching that, about, like, it's time. It's finally time. It's time to defeat the big bad, which is Sephiroth. Oh, here's that other theme. Sounds like Jaws. Flurry of the strings. That's just a snippet. I could go. Yes, we get it. The creepy clown music, Tamberly. But it's definitely, oh my goodness. I just had so much fun listening to it, and I highly encourage you taking a listen to it yourself. That was the first time I made the Jaws connection, but it definitely kind of sounds like Jaws. A little, that chromaticism you hear from the movie Jaws with the dun 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 dun. But it's very catchy. It's very catchy. So yes, this game won for the Game Awards, and I agree with it. And I had with all of the games. Oh, hello Meadows. Thank you. Hi, it's nice to see you. But yes, I definitely agree with this game being, it's great to see you as well. I think this I don't blame them for picking Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for the game to win. I really enjoyed it. But all of the games in the Game Awards nomination list for nominees, I saw interesting and desirable aspects in all of them, and I think there's something worth listening to all of them and checking them out. So please do check them out. Yeah, I don't envy anyone who has to play those runs either, because that can be its own beast. But I think that's one of the reasons as well. When I was playing music a lot more frequently, when I was playing the violin, and when I did get to play music that I've heard before and had a desire to play and replicate on, my instrument, which was the violin, I enjoyed it so much because like I said, that same connection with hearing an orchestra being as epic as what you can see in the gameplay of a video game or something like Final Fantasy VII, like being able to play that, I feel like gets you closer to that epicness and gets you closer to immersing yourself in what's actually happening. And while it may be hell to play something like that, if you can do it successfully or do it in any form at all, I think that's also really fun. So I bet the musicians on tour right now playing the game's music, they're having a fun time, at least in some capacity, playing it, because these themes are, and I say this one more time, they're so epic. They're so epic. So that's the Game Awards. I had a lot to talk about that. Now we're gonna talk finally about the Grammys. Hopefully you weren't waiting too long to talk about the Grammys. But we're gonna let me see. This is the live stream. There we go. We're gonna talk about the Grammys now. And for this one, I looked at the category more as a whole, and more in a general sense, because there were things that I saw as a theme between all of the games. And I feel like even if you're not familiar with these games, the fact that they come from franchises, like huge franchises that you probably are familiar with, you just need maybe that to understand at least the gist of what the game's about. So the Grammys, again, their gaming music category is called Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games and Other Interactive Media category. And I'll at least say this before going into my spiel about the Grammys one, that one of the standout ones, and I'm about to play you some more examples, or some more audio examples, that I thought was interesting and neat and enjoyed its reimagining, was the nomination for Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. Oh yeah, let me make sure you know all of who was nominated for the Grammys video game music category before just going off of them. So we had 5 nominations there as well. We had Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. That was one of the games. And then the next one was God of War Ragnarok Valhalla. Next one was Marvel Spider-Man 2. And then Star Wars Outlaws. And then we had Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. And if you watched the Grammys this past Sunday, you knew who won. And I'll tell you, but I'm gonna make you work for it, and I gotta talk about the other games first. But as I was coming across and looking at the different games within this nominated category, I thought Avatar's Frontiers of Pandora was interesting. There's obviously a movie franchise tied to it, and there's a whole section of a Disney theme park dedicated to it now. So it was it was pleasing to kind of find things familiar from what I've heard on videos of like the theme park rides in Disney, that how they replicated the Avatar music, things I've heard from there that I've also heard from the movie, that I could also kind of hear it still being related in the game. So there's this one theme in the original Avatar movie called Pure Spirits of the Forest, and there's one area there that I want to play because I hear musically chordal motion, and by chordal motion I mean the different chord structures and colors and tones. I hear similarity of that in what I hear in the Frontiers of Pandora game that was on the nomination list. So I'm going to play the Avatar theme from the movie, the original 2009 movie, first. And I'm going to play a little snippet from there. So just listen to it, and then don't listen for a direct copy, but the same characteristic and feeling, because that's what I noted between these two. So let's play this. Oh, it was just very quiet. And so this snippet that I'm pulling from the Avatar's Frontiers of Pandora, this is from its gameplay. And this is when, for some context, the character that you play as, you're one of the Na'vi that the military people try to take in and become more human-like. So, you learn, more human traits and social ideals than Na'vi ideals. So this is your first time after being in this military base camp seeing actual Pandora for the first time, even though you're Na'vi. So I thought hearing just the sound of seeing Pandora for the first time, that I noted that musical connection, and I thought that was pretty neat. So that's where this theme is playing from that we're about to listen to right now. So gonna play that. No signs of greenery at all. And you're about to step outside into the forest of Pandora. Kind of that wonder and awe in the music. And finally you see all this greenery. So that, and definitely when I listen to when I've watched some of the videos of the I believe it's called Na'vi riverboat ride in Animal Kingdom at Disney World. I watched videos on it. Have not been on it, but what does that matter? But I watched videos on it. The music there, it definitely sounds similar to the music the main theme that you hear on that boat ride. For that ride. And so I could even hear that in just that little snippet within the game, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is it's bringing music that is related to the Avatar universe, film universe. So I appreciated that from Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. It did not win. So I'll tell you that it didn't win, but I thought that was neat when I was listening to it. And so back to the rest of the Grammy nominations. So again, my take from the Grammy nominations this year is a little bit more general. What I noted is that most of the nominations from this category either came from film IPs, some already established film franchise, or if not, they feel inspired by a film-like experience. And so the games that I felt reflected this the most were the Marvel Spider-Man 2 and the Star Wars Outlaws. And if you watch some of the gameplays or cutscenes from this, you may be able to see what I'm talking about. These games, they come from their own universes of well-known film and TV franchises. Of course, you have Star Wars, which of course it's its own huge universe, and such as the Marvel universe as well, and in any plot and storylines about Spider-Man, there's a lot of existing content out there already about those two things. So when watching gameplay of these two games with the mindset like they aren't games, but rather kind of like the mediums that you're used to seeing them in, which I'd say film and TV shows, I feel overall that they might make for intriguing experiences, both the music and its plot. There were beats in the cutscenes in the game and the gameplay itself that felt familiar, with the cinematic approach to them. But as a game, because these are games, it felt difficult for me to immerse myself in the games the way enjoyable gameplay experiences have done for me in the past. Because outside of those cutscenes, gameplay moments felt like details that traditional shows and movies would leave out from their storytelling. And, those added details that are now in the game, it didn't enhance that immersive experience for me. It didn't destroy either. But as games where gameplay experience is an integral part of immersion, it felt like the level of adrenaline and connection were more closely tied to whether or not, they were more attached to a cinematic like elements, attached to their gameplay. So if something felt like it was gonna come straight out of a TV show was going on in the gameplay, that's when the energy kind of felt higher. But when it didn't feel like a one-to-one experience where you could see this in a game or in a Marvel movie or such, for me, that's when the actual gameplay kind of slowed down its momentum and the adrenaline was lower and such. So I felt like it was, for me, of what I saw of the games, an unbalanced gameplay experience. So it's just something that, it's difficult to, or not difficult, but that it's a gray area you approach when you bring things that aren't in its original medium, like I said, games that are made from film franchises or TV franchises, and being translated into a game space. So that's a gray area of, it might not always one-to-one, and sometimes you may have nostalgia tied to it, and that might impact your feelings for that as well. So that's most of the things that I noted, but before moving on to another point that I wanted to say about the Grammy nominations, is that the game that won for the Grammy nomination list, it was Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. And this one, for me, it was obscure. I didn't have any personal experience with it, and it being amongst all of these other game-like experience, movie-like games and cinematic type game experiences, Wizardry felt left field out for me. I didn't know what it was, but apparently after more research, Wizardry is this isn't like an original game. Wizardry itself is a game that came out in the 1980s, and it's one of the first original ones to kind of popularize or to help start off the RPG, and I believe I want to say Western RPG, but I think it's just RPG in general, kind of Dungeons and Dragons like gaming experiences. So this is another role-playing game, turn-based type game, and so this was, I believe, revitalizing something like that before. I don't think a one-to-one remake, but a revitalization of the original Wizardry kind of universe. And I could kind of hear that in the music. At first, I thought the music was like, I was like, oh, I've heard this before. This is what I would expect for playing a game like this. But when you put it in the context of hearing it and recognizing that this is supposed to connect to this game that ultimately inspired games like the original Final Fantasy and all of the other RPG-like games, that it makes more sense for it to be like something familiar with still new life breathed with still new life in it, but it's still familiar of like, oh, this feels like the foundation to games, that, you know, role-playing games and dungeon games, that this is something that I would hear musically. So Winifred Phillips won with her work, their work in Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. So that's the game and the music that won Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games and Other Interactive Media in the Grammy Awards this past Sunday. So that's neat to know. But what, you know, I do note is that, like I said, this is the third year of this category for the Grammys. And for the past 3 years of nominations in this category, you know, you wouldn't be short in finding composers that also belong to Kraft Engel Management, which seems to be, I think one of their parts, they have, they help with composers, or they have a list of composers under their management. And so I think in all of the 3 years, you'll see some composers from this management company on the video game list for there. And as some of the things that you noted is that the games that we saw nominated for the Grammy Awards, there weren't any like similar ones or same one-to-one copies in the Game Awards. They were all different games, 10 different games, which is interesting because you'd think over the past year, if we're talking about what games impacted us over the past year, that there would be some overlapping games or entries, but there weren't. And I'm not all that well versed still. I try to look up some of it, but I haven't figured out what the exact process is for getting a game to nomination for either one of them, whether it's crowd feedback or if it's some other way like nepotism. But it's interesting that there was no overlap between those. So this kind of moves on to I've talked about the Grammy Awards, I've talked about the Game Awards and the nominations and the games in them. Now I'm moving on to kind of the last final bit that I wanted to get in, kind of talk and share my thoughts and hear you all's thoughts in the chat or later on in the comments if you're watching this as a past live stream, about some of the implications of these categories for video game music in these Game Awards. Because when I was looking up opinions and information for this stream, I saw a good amount of people talking that talking about how usually the Grammy nominees in these categories were hardly reflective of what people in the gaming communities gravitate to. And, I felt the same about that because even when I looked at the nomination list for the Grammy Awards, when I looked at it this year, and I even did a blog article for it on our blog of note for the first time this category was introduced, I didn't immediately know the games that were on there. I had to get myself familiarized with it more and learn more about them. And again, I watch games a lot throughout the year, and so you would think even if I didn't play them or have my own personal experience with them, that I would see some of the content creators that I watch myself play them. But I haven't really seen any, with the exception of maybe like God of War. I haven't really seen any of regular gaming content creators play some of the games that are nominated on the Grammy nominees list. So it's just interesting, again, going back to seeing that there's no overlap between the two, and that the Grammys, it's less reflective of the current popular interests of game scores within the community by people who play the games or consume a lot of gaming content. Now, while the Grammys may have been more off in terms of its nomination, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Game Awards got it perfect in reflecting the community's experiences either. Because I also saw a lot of talk on different forums as well that they thought there were some games that they didn't see on there that should be nominated for gaming music that was really impactful, or that, might have stood better than some of the others that were already on the list. So the Game Awards isn't perfect either. It isn't 100% reflective of what the gaming community last year thought was, very momentous in terms of gaming music for 2024. But I will say that it got much closer than the Grammys, because I definitely could recognize the nominees on the list for the Game Awards and recall some sort of buzz for each game throughout the year, or by the notoriety of its game developers. So I may not have known Metaphor ReFantazio, but I knew of its different relative games like Catherine and Persona, and so I already knew kind of the notoriety from that. And Final Fantasy, even though I haven't played the actual games myself from the franchise, I am familiar with Final Fantasy and what kind of comes with that, or the expectations that comes with that type of game. And some of the others, Silent Hill 2, haven't played it, and before watching it, I was still aware of what kind of game it was, or what some of the expectations were. So the Game Awards, I'd say, is much closer in kind of getting a better feel and pulse of what the gaming community liked in terms of gaming music. But that's another reason why we're doing this here, Musical Mind Games, because rather than just, taking our own personal individual assumptions and, analysis of what gamers actually like, we want to hear and talk about what games matter to you all. I know a lot of Musical Mind Games, we've been showing games that, introducing games that I thought were interesting, and then hopefully in the future, sharing more games where we both experience it for the first time, all of us, me and you all, the community on that end. But this is one reason why we're doing it, because, again, showing other ways to get to classical music, but also noting what things are impactful for the community. And so we can have a more amplified voice about getting better representation of what we actually liked within the past year, or what we thought was actually notable to get awards for. Not to say, I'm going to say that I'm not going to, I think the people that won their awards definitely deserved it, and I think all of the nominations were interesting and good, desirable games. Definitely, I encourage you all to take a look at all of the games that were on the nomination list for either one of them. It's just interesting to see how it differs from what you see if you pull up YouTube gaming and seeing what people are into that year with new games and scores, or even on Twitch, seeing what new games people are playing and the music that's involved with that, and what games you see a lot, and for them not to occur, for them not to occur on these end of year video game music award categories. So again, that's why it's important that we have these, so we can get more consistent, or get a better idea of what resonates with the gaming community in terms of gaming music that they liked from the previous year. And so that's basically it. That's basically it, what we have for tonight. I took you on a long journey, and with the music that I played for you, again, after the stream ends and it eventually goes up, in the description, there will be show notes, and I'll have links to the music that I played for you, and I'll have a written out list of the nominees from these two Game Awards shows. But I just thought, since we missed it in our break, or these things were occurring during our break, I wanted to talk with you all about them, because those are things that I was seeing on the off time, and I had some thoughts about it, and I wanted to talk with you all about it, and see if you all felt the same, and if you differed, what those differing opinions were, and so we can kind of have a conversation about more about what games we enjoy, and the music that goes along with them, and how they can make our experience. So I'm gonna set us, since we're getting into ending our stream, I'm gonna set us off with some musical vibes for our musical mind games to go off with. So there we go. We've got some tunes back in there. But that's gonna be it for tonight. I highly, highly, highly encourage you check out all the different nominated games from the list. It's 10 different games, but it's a variety. And if you didn't know any of these games and have an opinion before this stream, maybe this will make you curious to check them out, and so you can kind of create more of an opinion or your own personal perspective about some of these games and its accompanying music that comes with it. So please look at it, and if anything, please look at that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth music, listen to it, and look at the gameplay, because I really enjoyed it, and I just want to pass on a similar experience to others, for them the opportunity to enjoy that as well. So if you remember, please look at that game at the very least. But that's gonna be it for tonight's stream. Very, very happy to be back, and to chucking it up with you all and playing, talking about playing music and games and what games resonate with us the most. I'm very thankful for that, so I'm glad that we're back. And thank you all for coming back and viewing the stream. It's great to have you back. We will, as we normally do, we have Musical Mind Games 2 Tuesdays out of the month, and so every other Tuesday. So the next stream that you can expect for Musical Mind Games will be not this coming Tuesday, but the next Tuesday, February 18th at 6 p.m. I highly encourage you to keep an eye and ear out for any notifications or messages or promotions about our next stream, so you can be in the know about it. If you enjoyed watching this stream, please consider subscribing to this channel. You don't just get Musical Mind Game live stream, you get all these other different wonderful content about classical music and music in general to discover. So when you're subscribing to this channel, you get a plethora of good musical things in your inbox. So please consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed this. And as well as, before you leave the stream, giving a like to the stream, because it helps showing your support. But yeah, consider giving a like to the stream as well. If you enjoyed my takes and myself, my commentary on things, I have my own shift at the station on our on-air programming. It's 4 p.m. on Sundays, so that's when you can hear me. You can hear me either through our WDAV mobile app or at wdav.org/archive, and you can hear my previous weeks in my shift if you missed it. So, there's always my commentary hanging around out there and my announcing. Once again, I want to thank you all for joining the stream and coming back. MMG has returned! Yay! Get hyped! And I'm Christen Crumpler, and I will catch you in the next stream. Bye!